4개 박으면 데몬 미션 하울링, 데몬 그랩, 제노사이드 이렇게 박으시면 되는 거예요. 진짜로 이거는 사실은 저희 그 한국 서버 이제 직업 게시판에서도 이제 얘기가 엄청 많이 나왔는데 이제 명답을 드릴게요. 명답을
Oh,
이제
she has the answer, guys, from
네,
every
네.
single Shadowhunter players of all Korea.
제가
She
여러
knows them
이제
all.
좀 고레벨부터 이제 약간 좀한 고레벨 그러니까 배럭 구간부터 약간 고레벨 분들까지 약간 좀 인터뷰를 하면서 좀 여러 가지 얘기를 했는데
So she has interviewed, you know, people who have Shadowhunters as like low. 그러니까 우리는 로팡 레벨이라고 해요. 로팡 캐릭터.
로팡?
그게 배럭이에요, 배럭. We call them low-pan characters. Korea calls them barracks. Yeah, 로팡 캐릭터. 로팡 돌리니까. So from low-pan character 14, 15 to super character, a super high-level character, she interviewed every single one and collected data to find out which build is actually more optimal. So she has the answer for us, guys.
일단 좀 얘기를 해드릴게요. 지금 제 세팅이 이제 특성이 특화 신속 그리고 환각 세트를 이제 채용해서 각인 같은 경우는 원한 이제 충동 직각이죠. 원한 충동 예둔 아드 돌대. 그리고 이제 뭐 에테르 1 그러니까 이거는 이제 고대니까 고대는 좀 빼고 생각하셔도 될 것 같아요. 지금 요렇게 갔는데 아마 이제 얘기 들으신 분들 다 얘기 들으셨을 거예요. 이게 지금 제가 왜 이 세팅을 해놨냐면 저는 구원이라는 이제 세트 효과 나오기 전에 맞춘 세팅이에요. 지금 제가 맞춘 세팅이 구원 세트 나오기 전에 가장 파티풀 기준 가장 높은 DPS 세팅이었어요. 구원 나오기 전에. 오케이? 그래서 이 세팅을 했는데 지금 가장 궁금한 게 그러면 지금 특치 구원이 가장 세냐 아니면 특신 환각이 가장 세냐 아니면 특치 환각이 세냐 지금 이렇게 세 가지로 대표적으로 많이 나뉘어요. 이거에 대해서 일단 천천히 하나씩 설명을 드리자면
So what we're going to talk about is the full build, okay? The how Shadowhunter is built, because she has multiple builds and this confuses a lot of people who are trying to main Shadowhunter or who are trying to make Shadowhunter ults, right? So as you can see, her setup right now is Spec-Swift with Hallucination, right? So with Grudge, Class, Keen Blunt, Adrenaline, and Raid Captain. This is exactly the same as my build. The reason why this is exactly the same as my build is because before the Salvation Relic set came out, this particular set had the highest DPS on every single standards, as in like every single party play, etc. and everything. If you have the party play with the yearning buff involved, this particular build had the highest DPS. Now, since we have the Salvation, we have three types. So we have Spec-Crit with Salvation, and then we have Spec-Swift with Hallucination, which is what she has right here, or she and I has. And then we also have Spec-Crit Hallucination, right? Those are the only three things that are existing right now. And she's going to go over one by one, in very detail, to figure out which is actually more optimal, or which is a better decision for everyone. And also, we're going to take away ancient accessory because you guys aren't getting ancient accessories for a very, very long time. So this is considering 5 threes, which will be for most of you guys that are going to be for like a couple years.
특신 환각부터 그러면 얘기를 할게요. 지금 제가 가지고 있는 세팅이잖아요.
Yep. Now let's talk about this particular set, this particular build that she has right now, the Spec-Swift Hallucination.
목걸이에서 신속을 땡기게 되면 이제 약 한 10% 정도 공이속이랑 쿨감을 땡겨와요. 이런 장점이 있죠. 그래서 이렇게 신속을 땡겨오니까 고레벨 홍염이 요구되지 않는 그런 장점이 있어요. 그렇기 때문에 유물 구간 같은 경우는 사실 그러니까 지금 북미 레벨 정도면 사실 이제 많이 높아야 1500까지 뭐 있겠죠. 구간에는 보통 보석이 진짜 높아야 7레벨, right? 이런 경우는 특신 환각이 좋아요. 네. 무조건 특치 구원이 좋은 게 아니에요. 보석 레벨이 낮으면 특신 환각이 좋아요. 이렇게.
So let's go over this particular build that I have and she has here. So which is Spec-Swift Hallucination with Grudge Class, Keen Blunt, Adrenaline, and Raid Captain. So for Spec-Swift, the advantage of having Spec-Swift is, again, Shadowhunter is a spec class. You need to have full spec, and then you have two choices on the necklace. You either go crit or swiftness, right? I'm pretty sure everyone knows this already. So if you go swift, you have an advantage of having attack speed and movement speed and cooldown, right? You get about 10%. You get about 10% of attack speed and then a cooldown, etc. Now, therefore, because since you have 10% from the swiftness already, you don't need higher level gems. You don't need higher level cooldown gems. Therefore, if you have gems that are under level 7, or if you have level 7 gems, which most people do have right now, as in 7 gems on the demon skill, this particular build is the strongest, because the Spec-Crit Salvation is not actually the one trick thing. The reason is because Spec-Crit requires you to have higher level cooldown gem for your skills to cycle properly. So since this particular class uses swiftness, you can actually rotate skills much faster, so it requires a lot less level gem. Therefore, which is the most chosen build for lower level Shadowhunters. Additionally, for Hallucination Set, as all of you guys know, it gives you additional crit rate, and it gives you a lot too. And before, you guys don't have this particular buff yet, but it's going to change soon because we had a balance patch, right, guys? And the hallucination buff lasts 90 seconds. Now it lasts 120 seconds, and it used to be resetting. The buff used to reset by 1 second. It used to increase by 1 second if you have to crit. Now, if you just hit the boss, if you just hit the skill, the buff increases in duration. So it is much easier to keep that buff, the bonus crit buff, on the play. So the Shadowhunter itself, this particular build, you have about 75% crit rate, which is really good for Keen Blunt to be efficient. Therefore, since all this stuff is all balanced out, you will be dealing very, very decent average damage that decent damage throughout, where you don't really have a janky way of seeing a lot of white numbers, etc.
그러면 이 세팅에서 만약에 고대 악세 세팅을 가면 1을 뭐를 가면 좋을까요? 이렇게 하면 지금 현재 나온 세팅 중에 에테르 포식자 1이 에테르 포식자가 가장 딜은 높아요. 고점이 가장 높은데 이 친구가 예열이 필요하잖아요. 30스택을 쌓아야 되고, 그리고 이 친구가 유지 시간이 굉장히 짧아요. 90초밖에 안 돼요. 그러면 다른 선택지가 없냐 하면 타격의 대가 1을 이제 가요. 타격의 대가 1, 저밭 1, 돌대 1 이렇게 가는데, 이 친구들 장점이 뭐냐? 그냥 선택인 것 같아요. 그러면 돌대를 빼고 뭘로 하면 저밭 가면 되고, 약간 이런 식인 것 같아요. 그래서 만약 완전히 이 세팅이랑 똑같이 간다고 하면 여기서 가장 고점 높은 건 에테르 포식자 1, 아니면 무난하게 조건 없는 거는 타대 1, 이 정도 추천하면 될 것 같아요.
So for those of you who are wondering about 5-3s and a 1, right? So let's say you have a 9-7 stone and then you want to plan out the future. So the level 1 engraving from this particular build, you only have a couple of choices. You got Hitmaster 1, you have Curstole 1, and then you also have Ether Predator 1. And the best engraving for level 1 is Ether Predator 1. It's because it's one of the most efficient engraving for you to have. It's just the downside for Ether Predator is it takes a lot of time to get the stacks up. When you have the stacks up, it just does a lot of damage, and the buff only lasts 90 seconds, so you gotta reset it every gate. But as long as the fight just keeps on going, the Ether Predator tends to be a very, very efficient engraving for level 1. So most people, for this particular build, you have the 5-3s, and then you have level 1 Ether Predator.
Good.
As she has right now. So it's just a safe way of just having a real balanced build.
아,
Yep, now we're gonna talk about the other build. Spec-Crit Salvation.
특치 구원 같은 경우는 원한 충동 예둔 아드는 고정으로 가지고 가야 됩니다. 그리고 특성 비율은 특화랑 치명을 이제 쓰죠. 원한 충동 예둔 아드가 고정이면 나머지 가기는 뭘 하면 되냐? 저밭, 돌대, 타대 중에 선택하시면 됩니다. 근데 지금 현재 파티풀 기준은 가장 높은 고점은 원한, 충동, 예둔, 아드, 돌대예요. 근데 단점이 있어요. 이 돌격대장이라는 그 각인의 풀 효율을 뽑기 위해서는 만찬, 이속 음식을 챙겨야 돼요. 그리고 한 가지 더. 이 친구가 변신을 하면 S랑 A 스킬을 3번을 사이클을 돌리는 게 DPS를 유지하는 게 중요하거든요. 이렇게 특치 세팅을 하게 되면 최소 9레벨 홍염이 필요합니다.
To simplify a little bit, the engraving grudge class, demonic impulse, keen blunt, and adrenaline is basically set in stone. Because it just works so well with the class, and I'm pretty sure you guys know this already. And as for Spec-Crit with Salvation, right? So when Salvation, you put it to 20 stacks, it increases attack speed by 10%. So since it increases by 10%, it fills up the lack of attack speed that has been lost from the swiftness, which is the last build. So with that, you have an option to do the DPS properly. But the problem is, even if you have the attack speed, your cooldown's a little bit lacking. So when you're transformed, your goal is to use your A and S skill 3 times to make your cycle actually viable, because you're supposed to use the A and S skill, which is your main DPS skill, 3 times within a transformation. The swiftness build has no problem doing that with level 7 gem. However, for the spec crit, you don't have much cooldown to cover it up. So you need at least level 9 cooldown gem for your A and S skill to come back 3 times for 1 transformation. And also the 5th engraving, I didn't really explain. Your 5th engraving, you have an option of so the 5th engraving, the set in stone engraving that I showed you guys, keen blunt and adrenaline, and grudge and class is obvious. Grudge class, keen blunt, adrenaline, set in stone. And the 5th engraving is an option. You have either Hitmaster, you have Cursed Doll, and you also have Raid Captain. And the thing is, the Raid Captain has the highest ceiling because that's the only engraving that gives you 18% damage from the movement speed. But the thing is, you don't go swiftness. So since you go crit, you need to have the feast that gives you additional speed, and then you also need to cover that up with different attributes to make it viable.
딱 얘기해 드릴게요. 특신 환각이랑 딜 차이는 미미합니다. 한 2%에서 3% 차이 납니다. 이게 이제 이 구원 같은 게 편의성이 이제 좋다고 했잖아요. 편의성이 좋다는 게 그 한숨 돌리기 패시브가 있어요. 이 패시브가 위기 모면 같은 효과인데, 그러니까 내가 실수로 죽을 거를 살려줘요. 진짜 죽을 만큼 아픈 걸 맞았는데 위기 모면처럼 한 번 살려줘요. 그리고 이제 이게 고레벨이면 고레벨일수록 이제 사실
딱 맞고
고홍염은
싶으니까.
고홍염, 그러니까 고레벨 홍염 보석은 신속 특성을 채용을 하면 효율이 떨어져요. 그래서 솔직히 말해서 보석이 홍염이 9레벨 이상이면 구원 세트가 훨씬 더 효율적으로 좋을 수밖에 없어요. 그냥 특신 환각 같은 경우는 10레벨 홍염, 9레벨 홍염 꼈을 때 그 신속 특성이 효율이 좀 떨어져요. 9레벨 홍염은 효율이 안 나와요.
So let's talk about salvation a little bit more. That she talked about salvation. So when you stack it up 20 times, what's the difference between salvation and hallucination, right? So you have the set, you have crit spec, you have salvation, you have the attack speed, great. And also at the same time, the salvation set itself, it has a mini it has a mini crisis evasion. So in terms of quality of life, salvation do be a little better. Like at least you know what? Actually, for quality of life wise, when you go to a raid that's much harder, and you tend to get hit, and then if you're gonna die from it, that the relic set actually saves you from death. Because it just gives you like a one time where it just resets all your stack to survive like a big hit. So for quality of life wise, salvation is much better than hallucination. Also at the same time, if you happen to have a level 9 gem or above, let's say you have a level 10 gem on each, since you have enough cooldown to do 3 ANSs, salvation do more damage. Like the crit spec salvation does more damage straight up. And it's up to 2 to 3% of the differences, right? But since, are you gonna spend all that and the other disadvantages for the 2 to 3% damage increase? I don't know. That's why this is almost preference based. For example, the reason why let's say the Shadowhunter for Swift spec, if your gem level is only 7, it's fine. But let's say your gem level is 10, the swiftness tends to be less efficient because the cooldown just doesn't work like that, right? So if you have like a level 10 higher gem, you just have another option for you to just rebuild and work on the Salvation build instead. But obviously, those are the differences are so short that it's just like based on preferences. But I think the biggest preference that I've seen from her talking is Salvation have a mini Crisis Evasion for you to have to be very safe compared to Hallucination. 네.
오케이. 이제 돌대랑 저밭 이야기 해드릴게요.
So she's also going to talk about Cursed versus Ray Captain because these are really important.
이거는 진짜 딱 말씀드릴게요.
오케이,
무조건 풀 효율, 각인의 풀 효율을 놓고 보면 돌대가 더 셉니다.
Of course, 18%, 18%.
Yeah, 18% and 16%, right? But
Yes.
문제가 있어요.
There's a problem.
돌대는 전제 조건이 너무 맞추기가 어렵죠. 사실은 특치 구원을 땡기면 사실 신속을 140을 맞추기가 쉽지가 않아요. 그래서 아마 어떻게 맞추냐, 만찬이랑 이속 음식을 먹고 갈망 3세트까지 받으면 아마 이속 음식 베르닐 왈까지 먹는다 치면 한 138까지는 아마 뽑을 수 있는 걸로 알아요. 그러니까 풀까지는 아니어도 거의 풀 가까이 뽑을 수 있다. 뭐 만찬 이속 음식에다가 지금 이제 아마 외국은 근데 갈망 3셋이 없잖아요. 그냥 갈망 세트를 하면 138까지는 아마 뽑을 수 있을 거예요. 그러다가 이제 뭐 추가로 뭐 팔찌, 신속 팔찌 뭐 이렇게 하면 뭐 뽑을 수 있어. 풀 효율은 아니지만 뽑을 수 있어요. 근데 나는 이런 전제 조건이 너무 싫다. 나는 저걸 맞추기가 쉽다 하면 저밭을 가는데 저밭의 단점이 있어요. 이게 공증 16% 이제 각인이잖아요. 근데 아드랑 같이 갔을 때
효율이 떨어지네.
저밭의 효율은 최대로 많이 뽑아요. 15%예요.
Let's talk about Cursed versus Raid Captain. So the reason why we're talking about this again, to go in the beginning, what are the 4 important engravings, right? The 4 important engravings: Grudge, Class, Keen Blood, and Adrenaline, right? You have the 5th engraving, you have an option. You have Cursed, you have Raid Captain, you also have Hitmaster, because you guys have been asking Hitmaster. So as for Cursed and Raid Captain, the problem is Raid Captain is the best. Like, Raid Captain has the highest ceiling because it gives you 18%. But the problem is, you gotta have that movement speed covered up, right? You gotta have 140% movement speed to have 18% damage increase. And in order for you to do that, you need to have the Feast, you need to have the movement speed food, you have the Yearning set, you need that bracelet to make it about 138%, right? But what if you get slowed down at the boss fight? What if your support dies? Like, what if all this stuff happens? Your Raid Captain efficiency just goes down. That's why some people go, I'm very lazy to just eat a feast all the time, or like I don't really trust the support. Those people go Cursed because it's just a flat 16% increase with a penalty of not healing as much, right? But with Adrenaline, since you go Adrenaline as one of the most important engraving, with Cursed together, it's about 15% efficiency. So you're just getting that 15% flat. And as for Hitmaster, the Hitmaster's damage on the Hitmaster's damage increase does not include Awakening, and as you notice, Shadowhunter's Awakening does a lot of damage, so it does the least out of all 3, but it's cheaper, right? And it's an option too. It's an option for everyone to have.
이 얘는 저도 안 해봤는데 이제 저희 유저분들 이야기를 토대로 좀 얘기 드리자면, 얘 같은 경우는 치명을 진짜 많이 땡겨온. 그래서 얘 같은 경우는 얘도 아마 그 각인은 특치 구원이랑 비슷하게 가는데, 이 친구 단점이 이제 공속 버프가 없잖아요. 구원을 쓰지 않기 때문에. 그러니까 한 방 한 방 강한데 공속이 너무 느려서 구원에 비해 솔직히 DPS가 높게 나오진 않더라고요. 사실 이건 내가 직접 경험을 안 해봤기 때문에 그냥 이 세팅을 쓰는 유저분들 이야기 토대로 말씀드리는 거예요.
So there's a third set too, Spec-Crit Hallucination. So one hit, all the hits are very strong because you see a lot of yellow. You almost see all yellow numbers for Spec-Crit Hallucination. But however, same problem for Salvation. You have the lower attack speed, the cooldown's low. Also, since you don't have additional speed, if you happen to take Raid Captain, I wonder how you're gonna make that Raid Captain efficient, right? So, without all of them, based on the users that use this build, the hits are very, very slow, but they're very strong. So it's like an option that you can also have as well. But the DPS happens to be much lower, actually a little lower than the Spec-Crit Salvation.
이건 나의 특집 환각 같은 경우는 아들을 빼고 저밭 돌대 예둔을 고정으로 가져가고 1을 이렇게 준다네요. 사실 그런 게
아드
저는
1.
예,
맞아요.
특히
저게 맞아요.
너무 높네.
Yeah, so as I was saying, as you were saying, right? Instead of Adrenaline 3, what it does is you have Grudge, Class, Keen Blunt, and instead of Adrenaline 3, you have Adrenaline 1. If you have 5 3s and a 1, like with a 9/7 stone, right? So since you have Curse Stall, or Hitmaster, right? And then you have Raid Captain as those 5 engravings, and then you have Adrenaline as level 1 because you have hallucinations to cover up your crit rate anyways. So you just do that 16% more damage, but you're just that much more slower. Yeah, so the problem is, so someone in the chat said, go Spirit Absorption 3. For NA, it makes sense. Like for Korea though, since our item level and our base damage is up so high, to the point that the percentage you need all that percentage in. You need to like stack up on all that multiplication to increase that damage even further. That's the problem we have here. So Spirit Absorption is like out of the option for most of the builds, for almost every class.